Okay, this is a refutation of some of Apostate Aladdin's critique of Jannah. I was not bothered doing it the whole way because it just takes too long. Apostate Aladdin questions why does Jannah have many levels? If you can have whatever your soul desires. The error here is taking the statement of Allah unrestrictedly when there are in fact exceptions to the rule. For example, there are two narrations that are relevant to this. One is the martyrs, one in Jannah. Maybe I'll... Let me just get this out. Let's bring out one example. Okay, so the souls of the martyrs live in the bodies of green birds who have their nests in chandeliers hung from the throne of the Almighty. They eat the fruits of paradise from where they like and nestle in these chandeliers. Once their Lord cast a glance at them and said, "Do you want anything?" They say, "What more shall we desire? We eat the fruits of paradise from whatever we like." The Lord asked the same question thrice. When they saw that they would be continued to ask and not left without answering the question, they said, "Our Lord, we wish that we mayest return our souls to our bodies, and so that we may be slain in thy way once again." And then when He, Allah, saw that they had no need, they were left to their joy in heaven. So this is actually an example of wanting something and not receiving it. So this is an exception to the rule. Let me just put this down here as a reference. Ask Allah to be resurrected on the dead. Allah doesn't give them that, sorry. And let's put a reference. Another narration, but this is going to be in another book. I can't be able to getting out, which indicates people wanting to go back to the dunya to do a specific deed more, being dhikr. Although the authenticity may be debated, I think it might be a mursal. Basically, the narration is something like, the only regret of the people of Jannah is that they didn't remember Allah more. Actually, let me see if I can find it. Let's see, maybe it's debated. Might be authentic. Hassan Suyuti. The healed parents will have no regrets except for moments that pass by them which they did not remember Allah. Which indicates or implies that they would want to have remembered whilst in Jannah. Where's that? But of course, okay, so which implies wanting to go back to do more dhikr, but of course Allah does not grant that. Now there are other obvious things which theoretically the soul could desire, but firstly those desires are not going to even happen, and secondly, that even if they could happen, even if they would happen, would never be allowed to happen in Jannah. So other obvious things that although the soul is capable of desiring, Allah would never grant include worshipping idols in Jannah, or killing another person in paradise, or taking their wives, or stealing their belongings, or destroying Jannah, or becoming God. If anyone has such desires, they wouldn't be granted, but not just that, the desires wouldn't even happen, since Allah would purify all of us from evil desires anyway. So that's how Jannah is supposed to be. So that their best argument, Aladdin, his best argument would be that the Quran is contradicting itself, making an absolute statement whilst detailing it someplace else. And to that I say, be consistent with this rule, and it will blow up in your face with your own speech. Tell me, have you ever said to a friend in your life, let's do whatever you want in some random situation? And did you mean by that literally anything, including your friend killing you, or raping you, or stealing from you? Of course not. You don't even need to make such a qualificative statement. You don't even need to say that. So isn't it obvious that the entire Quran warned against shirk and many other things? That it would not be the case in Jannah that unrestrictedly, whatever you could hypothetically want is granted. Of course not. So that indicates what? That the verse is not intending literally any desire one could have, and that then being fulfilled. But rather, many desires which are righteous. Okay, so I'm using ChatGPT, so I think this would help. Let me just go down. I don't think it's necessary. Okay, so this is another thing. I thought this was helpful. A helpful assist from the GPT. If Aladdin says thereby the Quran is contradictory, he has to be consistent. Anytime he told a person do whatever you want or other everyday absolute sounding statements, he was contradicting himself. What are some more examples of everyday absolute sounding statements that we humans say that are qualified with details elsewhere or even known without requiring to know the other detailed statements? So let's just go through some examples, and they all relate to desire, so it's perfect. So do whatever you want. Contextual limits are understood. You wouldn't interpret this as permission to steal, hurt someone, or destroy property. Implicit qualifications are based on social norms and morality. You can have anything you desire, gift, reward, opportunity. When parents or teachers say this to a child, they usually mean reasonable or safe desires, not literally everything. The child cannot desire to fly unaided or take dangerous actions. Eat as much as you want, often used at dinner tables or buffets. Implicitly limited. You can't eat spoiled food, poison, or steal someone else's portion. Everyone understands the restriction without explicitly stating it. Take whatever you like, usually meant for items that are permissible or appropriate. Nobody interprets it as permission to take someone else's money or forbidden items. Do what makes you happy. Implicit happiness must be legal, ethical, or safe. No one assumes this includes harming others, themselves, or society. You can sleep all day, implicitly qualified within reason, not at work or school obligations, if it will cause harm. Go anywhere you want, implicitly understood within safety laws or practical limitations. Nobody interprets as teleporting to dangerous areas or other impossible scenarios. Absolute statements are often context dependent. The Quran saying whatever your soul desires is similarly contextual, meaning righteous desires within the nature of paradise. Explicit qualification is often unnecessary. Everyone understands the limits implicitly, whether social, moral, or natural. No contradiction arises. Say something absolute in one verse and implicitly qualified in another is equivalent to normal human speech. I think that was enough. Let me see if this is worth getting into. Okay, so since now that absolute sounding statement is qualified, whether by other statements or even just by one thinking about the absurdity if the intent truly was absolutely unrestricted, such that whatever the soul could hypothetically want, it would get, then we have four possibilities with regards to whether or not we will desire what the upper levels have. That being the higher levels in Jannah. It could either be A, we could want what they want and do not get it. B, we could not want what they want because we won't know what they have. C, we could want what they have whilst not knowing what it is, other than it being a superior set of happy experiences than one's own. And there is even a D, that some things from the higher levels, if we do desire them, we could get. The proof of that is the narration that you will be with whomsoever you love in Jannah, as well as the fact that all of us get to see the face of Allah, which leads to happiest experiences possible in Jannah for any and all levels. Now, what's indicated is that this is limited. For Allah will not constantly be showing His face, nor will a person be constantly with everyone he loves. The proof of this is this. If Allah constantly showed His face, and it is the happiest, most pleasurable experience, no one would ever indulge in the lesser, happier experiences of paradise, making it pointless to create such things for us if we are never going to utilize it. The fact that they are created for us indicates that Allah will show His face for a limited period, and even though it will be repeated forever till eternity. I believe every Friday He will do this, and there are many narrations in which the people of paradise are indulging in the lesser happy experiences, which clearly prove that they are not constantly gazing at Allah's face. Now, when it comes to being with whomsoever you love, this must have a limit too. Otherwise, mere love for the Prophet would bring majority of Muslims, not just to Firdaus, but also the highest level of Firdaus, perpetually. Or that the Prophet is perpetually at the lower levels visiting us. Or, also there are limitations as to how many people can visit a single man. Most likely, there will be an order or even a waiting list, unless he can be in multiple places at once. Even if that were the case, it would indicate the possibility that the Prophet exists both in the highest levels in Firdaus and many other places. Below, there are some things indicating this possibility, like when the Prophet was on the horse to Jannah, he saw Moses in his grave praying, but also Moses right after in Jannah there. Allah also descends to the lowest heavens for all the places on earth in which it is tahajjud time, yet at the same time He is above His throne, above the highest heaven for all those places in which it is not tahajjud time. Now, either this is a contradiction, or it has the mental appearance of a contradiction, but it actually isn't one. And either contradictions are possible or they are not. Either all contradictions are possible or some. There's no need to argue that for arguing for the possibility of something to appear like a contradiction, but is not, in reality is easier and closer to a natural answer, although there are arguments that can be used justifying the idea that some or all contradictions are possible. That's not the same thing as them being justified and being believed in. Though a contradiction lacking proof is not to be believed in. Anyhow, as an example of something appearing to be a contradiction but isn't, we use this. Imagine a village filled with deaf people whom have been deaf from birth and have no concept or idea of hearing people, or hearing at all. And so one day a person who can hear is born. This hearing person grows up and stays in a forest, and one day he is looking forward in a forest when a group of deaf people far behind him walk on twigs, snapping them. They are behind the hearing person, meaning the hearing person's back is facing the deaf, not his front. Now the hearing person, he signals with his hand to the deaf people without turning to face them, and he signals them using his hand, basically saying, "Hello, I know you're there." These deaf people find this to be impossible and a contradiction. And when they convey it to their people, these people find it impossible and a contradiction. Why is that? Well, the hearing person didn't look at them, and it's not possible to look without his face looking at them or at a reflection, but neither occurred. He couldn't have smelled them due to their distance and because they were clean. Touch is of course impossible without actually touching, so it's not through seeing, touch, smell, and definitely not taste. And for the deaf people, how could he have known? Since they don't have a concept of hearing, they have no other concept to appeal to know how did he know that we were behind him. Each person in the deaf group tries to reconcile it with what they know. One person says he must have seen us without facing us and without a reflection, contradiction. Another person says he must have smelled us despite the distance and our lack of scent, again contradiction. The only person who's correct is one who says he must have known we were behind him through something else we do not know of. And this person will be correct and most reasonable out of the group. Yet, to him, since he doesn't know what hearing is, his mind cannot imagine how the hearing person knew the deaf group to be behind him. This lacking of concept results in the mental appearance of a contradiction. For this person, who even though he says this, the only concepts available for him that he knows of are like touch, smell, and seeing. And since that person, the hearing person, didn't touch, see, or hear them, he doesn't understand how it's possible for him to have known that the deaf group was behind them. So it has the appearance of a contradiction. How could you know without appealing to these senses that we all know of? It's a contradiction out of ignorance. And another example could be someone, I think we can skip through this because it'll be a bit long. But another example could be God, that's not grammatically correct. Someone says there's no red poles in the city, but God knows there is a red pole in the city. And that the one who claims there is none is making an impossible claim that contradicts reality. Yet the person who says this doesn't experience within his mind a contradiction when he says there are no red poles in the city, as he lacks knowledge of the fact that there are red poles. Now his claim cannot be true. When it is the case that the city has red poles, it is impossible for the city to both have red poles and for his claim that the city has no red poles to be true. Yet he will not experience in his mind any contradiction because of his ignorance, and is thereby finding something that is actually an impossible contradiction to be possible. This is the case where something that is a contradiction and impossibility in God's knowledge or in truth can appear to be possible in the imagination of a human due to ignorance. It is not possible for the city to have no red poles when it does, but the mind finds the claim possible because it lacks knowledge of the fact that the city does indeed have red poles. This isn't saying that the city couldn't be changed and become a city without red poles. It is simply saying that the human mind can find something false that is impossible in being correct. The city currently having no red poles. Currently in the present having no red poles. And thereby believe in fact in something that's a contradiction to reality. Let's go through. Aladdin, through a mocking insult, calls the Houris whores, but this is a contradiction because even by secular mythology, if a man had an infinite number of wives, each of those wives only have one man, so they are not labeled as whores, whom usually are defined as people who sleep around with many different partners. But even this definition is lacking in what a whore should mean, for it should be whoever is committing zina, with multitudes of women or men is to be called a whore. Thereby, the men of Jannah most certainly are not going to be labeled as man whores either by that definition. So the insult is irrational, doesn't even make any sense in what it tries to imply. Oh, let's go down. Aladdin critiques the Quran for not describing within Jannah the things that he'd want. It's Allah's choice what to mention and what not to. But Allah is talking to desert Arabs. Is he going to mention that divinely crafted anime, movies, manhwa, manga, or cycling is in Jannah? Things that perhaps interest you. Is he going to tell them that you can be the greatest YouTuber in Jannah or desert Arabs to the desert Arab Arabia? They would not have a clue. By the way, let me just qualify this. Aladdin implies when he says that's it. After Allah mentioned the description of paradise, as if to critique the Quran for not describing within Jannah things he'd want or would find relevant or interesting. It's Allah's choice what to mention and what not to, but Allah is talking to desert Arabs. Is he going to mention divinely crafted anime, movies, manhwa, cycling is in Jannah? Things that perhaps interest you. Is he going to tell them that you can be the greatest YouTuber in Jannah to desert Arabs of Arabia? They would not have a clue in what that is, nor care in the least. Now, none of the things I said are off the table and are not intrinsically evil for God to put in Jannah. The idea of infinitely greater and more pleasing stories, manhwas, movies, mangas, TV shows, circuses, cars, and whatnot are all to be expected. I get it. Aladdin doesn't feel the Quran is stating things that feel relevantly desirable to the human nowadays. But to be fair, delicious food and sexy righteous women, as well as handsome righteous men, universally appeal to pretty much all of mankind. As well as living in safety for eternity, not being in danger of getting raped, stolen from, murdered, your kids taken as slaves or concubines, being morally misguided, being poor, and many other endless problems that occur on earth. So what God mentioned is not exclusively desired by Arab men and even women back then, but it broadly or mainly applies to almost all humans anyway, for the scene described in those verses of Surah Rahman as well as other verses in the Quran is that of perfect peace, safety, guidance, no confusion, no disunity, no danger, no boredom ever felt, no sadness ever felt, no displeasure, anger, or irritation, even if it does mention certain things that appeal more so to one past generation of men than the current. Allah chooses to describe aspects of Jannah that communicate safety, pleasure, reward in ways that are immediate to understand. The Quran is addressing 7th century Arabs, concepts like anime, YouTube, and cycling would be meaningless to them. Key principle, Allah communicates in a way that the audience can comprehend, but that does not limit the reality of Jannah. Things described in Jannah, food, beautiful companions, rivers, gardens, comfort, safety, are broadly desirable across all humans, not just Arabs. Eternal security and safety, freedom from poverty, theft, war, and oppression, pure loving companionship, joy, contentment, absence of boredom, sadness, anger, or irritation. These are universal pleasures, even if some descriptions seem culturally specific. The underlying themes are globally relevant. The Quran does not need to list everything that exists in paradise. Possibilities include stories, movies, manhwas, manga, or other forms of entertainment. High-level skills like being a master YouTuber or artist. Vehicles, games, or experiences far beyond earthly imagination. Anything that is pure, pleasurable, and lawful is in principle possible in Jannah. This aligns with the Quranic principle that Jannah is far greater than what the human mind can imagine. No eye has seen, nor ear has heard, and no human heart has conceived the delights that Allah has prepared for the righteous. While Aladdin's critique misses the point, temporal relevance. He expects descriptions that fit modern tastes, ignoring that the Quran addressed its original audience in terms they could understand. He assumes that because some desires aren't explicitly mentioned, they don't exist, which is not supported theologically. Imagination limit. Modern pleasures are perfectly compatible with Jannah, even if not named. Of course, purified from their evil. Description in Jannah description in the Quran is selective, contextually appropriate, and illustrative, not exhaustive. Jannah contains everything desirable, whether mentioned or not. Critiques based on modern preferences misinterpret the intent of the divine communication. It's for comprehension, not cataloguing every possible pleasure. There's a severe problem with Aladdin's underlying belief if taken consistently. He's either saying God should only mention pleasures that modern people care about. He's either implying, let me be more explicit, he's either implying God should only mention pleasures that modern people care of, or that God should mention pleasures of every culture ever, so that when they read it, they will find relevance in the pleasures described and the pleasures described more strongly. But this would make the Quran unnecessarily large, a book that is aiming to convey to mankind the most important concepts and knowledge, such as worshipping Allah alone, Jannah, and so on. To list every possible relevant fun activity that appeals to all humans ever, past and present, would make the Quran absurdly long, for the interests and desires of humans are endless and varied. So it was in fact perfectly rational for Allah to mention some broad, near university-shaped desirable things within Jannah, rather than explicitly mention every fun activity ever, or what modern people find fun. I guess I'll read this off. It's the last thing anyway. Why not? By the way, I'll put up the video. Maybe Aladdin thinks I'm misrepresenting him. I think it was pretty heavily implied when I watched a certain segment. It was very short, to be fair, so maybe he thinks I am misrepresenting what he truly believes about this, about the limited pleasures mentioned in the Quran. Allahu Alam, but I'll go back to that segment if I can. If taken consistently, Aladdin's belief implies one of two impossible expectations. God should only describe pleasures that modern people care about. Problem: the Quran was revealed 400 years ago, long before modern activities like anime, YouTube, or cycling existed. Demanding modern specific descriptions is anachronistic and ignores the intended audience. God should describe pleasures of every culture, past, present, and future. Problem: human desires are endless and culturally variable. Listing every possible pleasurable activity would make the Quran absurdly long and unreadable. The Quran's rational approach: Allah mentions broad, near universal pleasures, gardens, rivers, abundant food, companionship, comfort, and safety. These are understandable and desirable across all humans, regardless of time or culture. The Quran focuses on core spiritual truths, not exhaustive catalogues of material and sentiment-based pleasures. In other words, the description of Jannah are illustrative, not comprehensive, teaching the essential principle: eternal bliss, safety, fulfillment of righteous desires. Why this is rational and appropriate: purpose of revelation, convey guidance or worship, morality, and preparation for hereafter, not to satisfy every modern or future preference for entertainment. Efficiency: broad categories communicate the idea clearly to all humans without overloading the text. Infinite potential: just because certain pleasures aren't mentioned doesn't mean they don't exist. Jannah's delights far exceed human imagination. Mentioning a few examples is sufficient and meaningful. Aladdin's critique fails because it projects a modern personal preference onto divine communication. The Quran's descriptions are strategically chosen for universal comprehension and spiritual guidance, so as a catalogue of every conceivable pleasure. This approach is logical, purposeful, and efficient, perfectly in line with the Quran's goals. Okay, let me just go to that video, maybe because I don't want to. Maybe I over-interpreted what he was trying to say.
Highest level, and of that differ as Allah described any level.
Whoa, Sheikh, calm down. Why are you getting all worked up? Mike?
The passing grade in the exam is 50. I want to get 50. I guarantee you this
It's tangent to sense of critical thinking. It's because they're made to feel inferior. Don't mean hur. Notice how the theme of this entire surah is things in pairs, which makes me think I'm quoting this verse at all.
in Surah Al-Rahman, Allah mentioned two levels.
ربه جنة آلاء ربكم حور don't mean حور, and so on and so forth. ذواتا أفنان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان, and so on and so forth. What now? Gardens don't mean gardens, which makes me think that the way the tafasir while the other tell me. Right on, you're not. What? God. All the virgin maidens in ruby and the corals are and green cushions. Blessed be the name of thy Lord, which is fruits, springs, women. Blessed be the name of thy Lord, glorious. That family, not the gardening variety.
So I think that's fair to derive out of that what his presumptions are about that the pleasures of Jannah seem irrelevant, unrelatable, culturally specific. Because if he's talking like that, if he had the assumption, that it's sufficient, like that's attractive and desirable, I don't think he'd be saying this. I think he but I don't think he realizes where the assumption is leading. If you're gonna go with the idea that the way to describe heaven, it should appeal to everyone and their specific interests, you would make the Quran absurdly long when Allah wants people to read it and actually remember a lot of it. You're just gonna make it unnecessarily long, especially when you could just mention broad pleasures. It's not that it's not like every single person will agree anyway. Like let's say God mentioned in the Quran everything that interests Aladdin. Would it not be the case that many cultures would simply not give a crap about whatever that Aladdin likes? Yes, they would not care. That's just how it is. Not everybody's appealed to his same interests. So again, this is like an unnecessary and irrational, I think, wrongful critique. It doesn't make sense. To be fair, it's implied. He didn't explicitly state it. I'm just deriving it from this as an interpretation of this. So do what you will with that, I guess.